right, it's that time. Let's jump in there. We have let's see. Let's start off with a question from Joe. He says, we recently had an evaluation for monitoring software, and the consultant told us we had tons of locked timeouts happening all day, every day in SQL, which put my boss in a panic. Let's see there. So I looked at just locked timeouts, and they were there. However, they had a zero duration. Books Online said zero duration timeouts are caused by internal hash probes, which are usually not an indication of a problem. We are internal hash. What are internal hash probes? And are these zero duration timeouts ever a problem?
I think internal hash probes are a spin lock. And if you want to talk about spin locks, they're over there.
not too far over there. Come back this way.
I don't think any of us do any kind of work in that. It's an interesting thing. What I would do is I would actually drive back the boss and the consultant to say, what are the symptoms that you believe end users are facing that are related to these locked timeouts? Otherwise, they're just like picking random measurements and going, look at that, cheetahs per second is fairly high. You know, tie back, how are the end users affected by these, and is this the right metric that we want to go after? Because my gut hunch is this is totally unrelated to what your end users are seeing.
Let's see. Chris Woods wants to first and foremost thank you for the free training modules. I think showing these to my boss is starting to convince him to actually pay for a full training session. Let me know if he's convinced. We'll send Brent your way, or maybe even on Erik, Doug, Angie, Tara. Maybe they'll do training as well moving forward. Thinking about that.
There's donuts. You can get donuts.
I'd like bacon instead, please.
He also says that we can't use Hackathon due to data types and tables. So other than that, what is the best reason to upgrade it from 2012 to 2014?
Cardinality estimator will help a lot, potentially.
Talk more about that.
So they sort of gave the CE a tune-up between 2012 and 2014, and it has a different way of arriving at the estimates that it's going to come up with for your query plan. And in a lot of cases, this will help. In some, it won't. But the nice thing is, if it doesn't help, you can actually revert back to the old cardinality estimator for that. There are other improvements too, although this isn't a great one, but enough people complained about how table valued functions would always return an estimate of one row, and that infuriated people to no end, and finally Microsoft said, okay, we'll fix it, and their fix was to change the estimate from 1 row to 100 rows. So that's probably not going to make a profound difference, but at least it's not 1 row anymore.
I like 2014 for the Temp TV stuff. It's a lot less eager to spill the disk and, you know, do all sorts of nasty stuff there. So a lot of Temp TV improvements. Temp TV is quicker.
2012 too.
With the right service packs and whatnot.
So if you want to learn more about that, go to our blog and search for Temp TV Eager Rights, and we've got a blog post from Kendra Little that talks about exactly which service pack and CU you have to be on 2012 to get that. But nice stuff.
And if your queries do a lot of select into to create temp tables and whatever, those are fully parallelized in 2014.
One thing I like about 2014 is if you're using availability groups, is the number of replicas increased, and that if you're constrained by the number of replicas in 2012, you get 3 additional ones in 2014, and that might be what you need to solve an architecture issue.
And even just availability groups, period. You know, you were saying you couldn't move to 2012. Now you get AGs in 2012 and 2014. If you're going to deploy AGs, you probably want to do it on 2014. But yeah, it's a huge, cool new feature. I like that one.
All right, let's move on to Sean Lee. He knows Brent's position tends to be more RAM, not more index rebuilds. But let's say I want to rebuild an index in parallel, even though the rebuilds are single-threaded. Could I use several agent jobs that fire off simultaneously where each one is responsible for rebuilding indexes for a portion of the database?
Yes, if they're hitting different indexes, but I don't know why you want to do that to yourself.
That's a tough one.
It happens a lot. It happens a lot when we try to answer these questions. What problem are you trying to solve exactly? With the index rebuilds, it's kind of the same thing. You say Brent's position tends to be more RAM, not more rebuilds. Sorry, am I reading that wrong?
No. He said no. He responded. I think he said, and he followed up with he wants to do it for speed. That's a problem he's trying to solve.
Oh, okay, got it.
So I want to make sure
I see.
storage.
Speed or duration of the jobs.
Yeah, the more load you throw at
it
storage,
faster, which is still.
Yeah. Make sure that the storage can actually keep up with multiple parallel index or multiple index rebuilds at exactly the same time, because that's usually a huge bottleneck there.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about like all those rebuilds. They're blowing up space with your data files. They're all writing a whole lot of stuff to your log files. There's a lot of additional I/O going on there. So I'd be careful about firing up multiples at once.
Would it make sense to maybe have multiple index jobs that target different tables? Like if he's got some tables that are pretty bad that he needs more regularly rebuilt, and then the other ones can be done at a different time, so it's not as intensive, but also it will go more quickly for the more urgent stuff?
You could do that. I'd also probably take a closer look at exactly what I'm rebuilding. Like, if you're worried about the speed and duration, maybe you're trying to hit too many things at once. Like, maybe look at bigger tables. Like, if you're using OLIS scripts, you can look at you can adjust the page count so that you're looking at like the default is 1,000 pages. You can start looking at like 5,000 or 10,000 pages so that you're only hitting your big tables. And you can also up the fragmentation levels that you're looking at so that you're not looking at 5 and 30 because those are really low. Like when you think about 5% fragmentation, that's just not doing you a whole heck of a lot of good to smush that in. You can start looking at like maybe 30% to reorg and like 70% to rebuild.
I'm really worried too because you're saying you want parallel, which also means you're on standard edition. Which means when you're doing these rebuilds, you're taking the object offline. I don't know that I really want to take multiple indexes offline simultaneously. You're starting to get a little dangerous there.
Yeah, you don't, unless you're really confident about what processes are running during your maintenance window. Like if there's like an overnight data load or like reports run or users might still be in there, you don't want to take a bunch of stuff offline for as long as it takes to rebuild those indexes.
All right, let's move on to a question from Marjan. For which operation is it worthwhile to upgrade to SSD hard drives? Where reads are more critical or writes?
Yes.
Oh, that's interesting. I would say if reads are critical to you, you probably want to be doing RAM anyway. You just want to add RAM because that's so much faster than SSDs. Whereas if you have to write to disk, it's because somebody did an insert, update, or delete, and you're being held up for those writes. That more RAM, you can't fix slow storage with more RAM for writes. You can really only fix reads that way. I kind of focus it on writes.
Speaking of inserts and deletes, a question from Erik. He says, a manager came up to me and asked me to learn about inserted and deleted tables for tracking inserts and deletes. I've never heard of them. Are these still used in SQL anymore?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're talking about just, say you want to do your own kind of cheap in-code auditing and just dump whatever was inserted into its own audit table, yeah, it's just inserted doc and then whatever. Is there a $sign in front of that? I can't remember the syntax. It's been a long time since I've written that, but I know it's still a thing. It has been for a while, and they didn't get rid of that or anything like that. It's really pretty simple. You see that a lot, too, with merge statements. People like to have the inserted and deleted stuff going places. So, yeah, it's pretty simple T-SQL.
Yeah, and, RIP Kendra, she has a blog post, 5 SQL Server features you're probably not using, which is actually one of the first places I ever saw about the inserted and deleted tables.
Question from Serge on monitoring tools. For monitoring tools, why do you prefer IDEA over Quest Foglight or Spotlight? Do you prefer IDEA or Spotlight?
They both look about the same. Just be careful with whatever monitoring product you use. If it has extended event stuff turned on, it can really bog you down. So you want to be careful about where you're throwing that out.
Yeah, I think we're not religious. I'm like hitting my leg against the table. I don't think we're religious about any of them. All of them are fine. I say out of the top three that we look at the most frequently, Dell Spotlight, Idera SQL Diagnostic Manager, and SQL Sentry Performance Advisor. Just install all three of those in a demo environment, not your production box, and go see which one you like the best. And the one that's the best is the one you'll actually use. I see so many people who are like, yeah, I got a tool, but I never learned how to use it. Well, do you even really have a tool?
or important too is the one you can understand.
Yeah.
A lot of monitoring products just like, here's 50 million graphs and look at what's happening.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Doug, did you change rooms?
No, I didn't. I moved to a corner of the room where I am actually being front-lit instead of backlit, so it just happens to be a really boring wall behind me, that's all.
You need some art, apparently.
Yeah, I need art, or maybe it's a bathe. Somebody's asking, Thomas is asking why you look like a prisoner of war today.
Yeah, yeah. Well, fortunately, they didn't make me take down the ISIS flag behind me or anything. I'm not a hostage anymore. This is just my
back to third-party tools. Ryan is asking, how do you feel about third-party SQL-aware backup products like Veeam?
Cool.
Great.
Test them. Make sure you test them, and this is the truth with any backup, even with native backups if you're going to use native backups. You should make sure that you're in your restores so that stuff actually works. We've just seen so many horror stories with every third-party thing where people are like, yeah, backups are working great, and then they go to do a restore, and they're like, you know what? It turns out it's not quiescing SQL Server's rights, and we have corrupt backups.
It turns out we took snapshots at 2 totally different times, and I have a data file from then and a log file from 5 minutes later. So,
third-party backup stuff is good too for things like, and this just came up this morning. Things like point-in-time recovery can be easier. I know there are. What was it, Eric? I think you said you would have killed for this feature of being able to restore a single table.
Yeah.
You can query backup files. Depending on the tool, you can query backup files without actually having to restore them. Neat stuff like that you wouldn't ordinarily be able to do.
Stuff I call DBA Viagra.
Oh my God.
Do the object level restores, and then you can read through the transaction log to figure out where in the transaction log something bad happened, so you know where to restore to. It's nice.
Nice. All right, that's good.
Moving along now.
Dorothy is asking, is it possible to change from Enterprise Edition to Developer Edition without uninstalling Enterprise Edition and installing Developer Edition and restoring databases?
What happened?
Definitely no. That you can go up, but you can't go down in terms of editions. So it's a great idea right before the licensing auditor gets there. Replace all your enterprises with developer. Unfortunately, it doesn't actually work. You're going to be uninstalling and reinstalling.
I have a question follow up on that. I was told that if you have a specified dev environment but you have enterprise installed, you would just be charged at the dev price if it's designated staging. Is that true? Do you know?
So there's these all big giant winks that are involved with license audits. It all comes down to your negotiating ability. Like we went through that at one of my last companies with a licensing audit, and they were like, in writing, we're going to recommend that you only install Developer Edition before we come back. All your developer boxes need to be Developer Edition. But they didn't charge us in that instance. I just wouldn't want to go do that, long term.
All right. Nathan wants to know, what should I be concerned about if I notice the transactions per second is much larger in my master database than my user database and other system databases?
People aren't setting their default database. They're connecting into master and doing stuff there, doing like cross-database queries. You can, if you want to get aggressive with changing that, just set people's default database over to Temp TV or whatever database that you want. I'm a huge fan of Temp TV just so that when some yo-yo accidentally does a deployment, it ends up in Temp TV instead of master. Although there's a gotcha with that, Eric. What is the gotcha with setting the default database to Temp TV? in a future version of SQL Server.
Oh, yeah, you can't turn on Query Store for that, which is a downer, because Query Store is pretty awesome. I was actually having a long talk with a client this week about catching plan regressions, or last week, catching plan regressions, and because they were having problems with, they thought, parameter sniffing and some other stuff, and we were walking through it, and they were like, well, we're thinking of moving to 2016 or 2014. I said, no, wait for 2016 because you'll have this, unless 2014 gets some like magic service pack that turns it on, at which point I might feel bad.
They might have to wait another year to upgrade to 2016.
It might, who knows?
Yeah.
Timely, right?
Yeah. Question from Chris. He says, is NUMA node the same thing as a CPU socket?
Usually, yes, but there's a little bit of a drawback there. Usually, every one CPU equals one NUMA node, as long as you're dealing with recent Intel Xeon processors. With AMD Opterons, not necessarily the case. AMD has this design where one CPU socket can have multiple NUMA nodes inside of it. So as long as you're using Intel Xeons, that statement is correct.
And you're not on a VM.
Yeah.
VMs see things differently.
A question from Michael. He's heard that the performance hit for using TDE is around 5%. In your experience, is that about right?
5% of what?
Of donuts. 5%. So the performance isn't as big of an issue for me as the one that is really big is when you encrypt, so TDE stands for Transparent Data Encryption. You encrypt the contents of what's inside your databases. Now when you go to back them up, they're like binary garbage. They don't compress worth a rip. So if you were using backup compression before or any kind of third-party backup compression, the hit is a lot larger than 5%. Yeah, it can be huge. The backup is now the same size as your database. Dun, dun, dun.
You also lose out on instant file initialization. You don't get like the instant growth anymore. You got to garbage all that. It's not even like zero writing. It's like garbage writing all that stuff out, like keyboard mashing. Yeah.
Nice. But yeah, so that can be huge.
Because if it was just zeros, like, potentially a hacker could tell the difference between what's empty space and what's actually data.
All right, question from Mike. Mike is testing Commvault snapshots for a DR setup, and we are seeing 6 to 7 second I/O freeze times on a server with 5 databases. The largest is 50 gigabytes. And no user load on the server. Seems like 6 to 7 seconds is too long for that scenario, and looks like the vendor isn't being very supportive.
I just want to preface this by saying I hate Commvault.
Why?
I have used them in the past at a job that I had theoretically at some point, and everything from the software to the support was miserable with them. And I tried my best to get us onto a different backup product, but then Brent hired me, so it didn't matter anymore.
I too hate Commvault. It's awful to say. I shouldn't say things like that. I try not to badmouth vendors, but if you search for Commvault on our blog, you'll kind of understand why. And there's a post talking about why Commvault is challenging for SQL Server backups. Big point. Read the comments in which multiple people say, Commvault isn't that bad, and then I go, can you get me these statistics? And then crickets, things get really silent. So the 6 to 7 seconds freeze time is not unusual at all for when you're doing a snapshot. That's why it doesn't usually make sense for databases of the size that you're talking about. It makes much more sense when I'm dealing with terabyte large databases where people are totally fine taking a 6 to 7 second freeze in exchange for getting full backups quickly. People don't like 6 to 7 long second stuff for OLTP databases that you could just back up with native backups in a matter of minutes. So.
One really big problem that I had with Commvault is that it used all backup devices to when they backed up to things. So like when you looked through like MSDB tables or like backup stuff, it was all just GUIDs, right? It was GUIDs all the way down. So like my big problem with that was, okay, if anything is ever wrong with Commvault, how am I going to restore this? Like if Commvault ever goes down, if the shanty VM that Commvault is sitting on ever eats dust, how am I going to do restores? Like what's going to happen? And there was never a good answer on that.
I don't know if we already answered this. This one is from Garrett, and we're going back to TDE. What is the best approach to measure the performance impact of enabling TDE?
If nothing changes, if you're not making any other changes in the whole entire world other than just flipping that switch, you flip the switch, wait for encryption to finish across your databases, then you look at your monitoring product for CPU and wait times before and after, so you can see what your most common waits were on the clock before and after enabling TDE. But I'm assuming your user load is entirely the same, your application is the same, you're not changing indexes. That just doesn't seem to happen very often. People love to get in their database and smear Krispy Kremes all over. Yeah, that's really fun.
Question from Ellen Johnson. I have a SQL Server 2014 server with 2 databases whose LDF files are very large and will not allow me to decrease the size, even though the available space is 98%. Full recovery, translog backups are happening.
Take a look at sys.databases, the log, reuse, wait description column, I believe it is, and it'll tell you why. Is it replication? Is it mirroring? Is it maybe the log backups aren't frequent enough? That column will tell you. So it's sys.databases, and it's towards the end of the table for view.
All right.
It said nothing.
Oh, is that?
Yeah, it's like nothing. You could check. You could run dbcc OpenTran and see if there's any long-running transactions. Keeping the log file from truncating when a log backup occurs.
And the part of the log that's in use just may be at the tail end part. So there's awful recommendations out there you can do. People say things like flip the database to simple recovery mode and then flip it back to full. I'm just of the opinion, don't do that. Wait a week and come back to it. The part of the database that's in use will be somewhere else instead. That's not the best answer. I just don't want you changing your recovery model in the middle of the day and breaking your log backups.
Bad idea, Pants.
Mm-hmm.
Question from Justin. Hi, Justin. He says, any benefit to doing a cluster install with 1 physical node and 1 VM node?
Benefit.
You come up with a lot of drawbacks.
Yeah. Trying to think of a benefit.
More
work for you.
Yeah. I'm going to say not really. No.
Okay, I'll go. What if you only were allowed? Your boss is like, you can only have 1 physical node, 1 physical box, and I need you to have high availability. So it's going to be better than having just 1 physical box, but I think if you probably polled us, we would probably lean you towards doing something like mirroring or log shipping rather than the cluster.
Mm.
He says
Justin follows up and says that he inherited that scenario, that config.
Well,
is it working?
That's a good question. No, I would just warn that if you move that VM anywhere and it's offline for any amount of time, your cluster could fail. So that's something to be careful of.
Yeah, if you vMotion the cluster node around and it happens to own quorum at the time, then it can fail too.
Maybe in that scenario, you would use a file share quorum. That way, it's an outside resource, remote resource.
Set up a file share on your domain controller.
Yeah. I inherited a lace koozie for beer cans, and it hasn't shown any benefit.
My Rococo Satay doilies are wonderful.
Ooh, nice. You're
Basically keeps your hands dry for the first 5 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then there's just Old English all over me.
Question from Barry. A few sessions ago, Brent recommended isolating Temp TV on its own drive and allocating 100% of the available space as Temp TV. I thought it was best to leave 15 to 20% of the drive space free for performance reasons. Does that not apply in the case of Temp TV?
It still applies that you should leave 10% of the drive space free for good luck and wandering gypsies. That's very important. No, so I go back to whoever told you the 15 to 20% free and get to the root of it. There were times when, back in the old days, you did this thing called short stroking drive.
That would come up.
Yeah, free short stroking. I just can't. Whoever comes up with these names. And so there are also environments with SSDs where you want to leave space free for garbage collection or whatever. These are under specific drives in standalone circumstances, not typically in RAID arrays, in what you would use for modern Temp TV setups.
Question from Fred. Back to, is it NUMA or NUMA?
NUMA, yeah. NUMA.
All right, so when counting NUMA nodes to consider max drop setting, do you include CPU?
Say what?
CPU 0, I think it says.
Yeah, 0.
Okay.
So, yeah, just the way that new processor counting works, it starts at 0 and goes up. So if you have 8 cores, you're going to see cores 0 through 7. Totally don't worry at all about the numbers on them. Just count the number of cores.
Gotcha. Let's see. Question from Dennis. He says, we have a small SQL 2004 Express instance with only 2 databases, and the MSDB is stuck restoring. Not sure what the client did. Tried to do the restore database, master database with replace recoveries, but no change. Verify the file location and permissions. Any suggestions?
What was the name of the person asking?
Dennis S.
Dennis F.
I know. See, I can't see that
Very
one either.
bottom.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, it's at the very
We're all leaning into it because, like, there's no SQL Server 2000. Oh, 2014. 2014. Oh, okay.
I've never heard of 2014 Express.
Yeah.
You just
As far as I know, you would have to restart the server in single user and rebuild MSDB if it's.
Because it's Express. I mean, Express is the totally free version of SQL Server. I would shut off SQL Server and then copy those files, just the user database files, over to another Express machine and pick up and take off running from there. Because this thing sounds like it's chock full of nuts, and I wouldn't want to try and troubleshoot something that's utterly free anyway. Just walk away from that thing and go take your user databases somewhere else more fun.
Let's see. Question from Tim. Well, I don't know if we can answer this one because I see the word MySQL database. He says he wants to migrate from SQL Server 2012 database to a local MySQL database and set up replication for internal, external reporting and another avenue for collecting metrics besides syntax conversion. What should I look for?
A new job.
Yeah, no. Don't do that. Don't do that. This is where I'm a huge fan of playing Columbo. I love the 70s detective show Columbo, where you play just totally dumb and go, oh man, I have no idea how to do that. You know, somebody's going to have to show me that. Yeah, that's not a route that you want to go down. You can outsource this. If you go to sites like Upwork, upwork.com, or elance.com, there are people offshore who will do this for you for like $10 an hour. Just contract it out to somebody else so that they can deal with the deliverables for you. This is a hot mess, and if you've never done it before, it's hard as hell.
Incidentally, if you want to watch Columbo, the 2 best episodes I've ever seen are Any Old Port in a Storm and Suitable for Framing.
Damn, now I'm going to write these down.
Let's take one more question. This question is from Gina. My backup storage admin wants to use EMC Network or SQL module to back up all of our databases. What would be the cons in doing this?
I have never used that.
Ever used
Is
it?
that the same thing as data domain?
No, totally
No.
different.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure then.
Get the documentation because there's a lot of gotchas around how it works. The big gotcha is just those usually that it's expensive. Like with the rest of EMC stuff, it's good. It's just expensive.
A big con of using any software is you need to learn the software. You need to know how to do backups. You need to especially know how to do restores. It's easy to back up. So why move to another platform for backups?
So someone just bought EMC. Who knows how long that's going to be.
I mean, is it a SQL Server DBA that now needs to use EMC when they already are very experienced using SQL Server backups? There's a large learning curve when using other packages.
Log shipping is tougher. Doing things that require reading the backups, or recovering from oops deletes. Like if you need to recover back to an individual point in time in the log file, that's much more challenging when you start putting your logs somewhere else. Yeah, not a bad.
That's all the time we have for today.
I'm going to be alone with my donuts. Woohoo! See you guys later.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.